Werewolf Romance by the Alpha's Claim Collection. Prologue. She didn't beg. She didn't break. She simply smiled, and that smile was the most dangerous thing he'd ever seen. Because Zara Cole didn't just survive the Alpha who destroyed her. She became the storm he never saw coming. And when she walked back through those pack gates, crown forged from her own pain, 3 silver-eyed suns standing tall at her side. Alpha Caden Voss finally understood the truth he had spent 8 years burying beneath duty and pride. You don't reject a woman chosen by the moon. You live with the consequences. Before we dive into tonight's story, I have one question for you. Where in the world are you right now? Drop your location and the time in the comments below. Is it a quiet morning in Canada? A rainy afternoon in London? Late night in Toronto? Midnight in Johannesburg? Early hours in Sydney? This community stretches across every time zone on Earth, and honestly, that never stops amazing me. Tonight we follow Zara Cole, a seer wolf who was rejected at the altar by the Alpha she loved, abandoned while carrying a secret that would shake the entire wolf world to its foundation. 3 sons. 3 divine gifts from the moon goddess herself. And a woman who didn't just survive her betrayal, she was forged by it into something her Alpha never saw coming. If you are here for fierce love, devastating betrayal, a supernatural comeback, and the kind of bond that not even rejection can permanently break, you are exactly where you need to be. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's grow this family together. Now tell me where you're listening from. Let's see how wide this community really reaches. Alright, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Bonding Ceremony. The Ireblood Bonding Hall had stood for 300 years. Its walls were carved with the names of every Alpha claim ever spoken within them, generations of wolves bound to one another beneath the same vaulted ceiling, the same torches burning gold, the same night air thick with the scent of crushed moovine. To stand inside it was to feel the weight of every bond that had come before. To feel, in your bones, how permanent a thing was about to happen. Zara Cole stood beneath the claiming arch and told herself she wasn't trembling. She was. But only on the inside. The silver gown moved with her like water, stitched by the pack's eldest elder with thread drawn from the first moonrise of the year. Her dark hair had been woven with tiny white flowers, lunar blossoms, rare and stubborn, that only opened after dark. Every she-wolf in the hall had watched her walk the procession aisle with something close to reverence. This was the ceremony every female in the Ireblood pack had dreamed of since childhood. To be claimed. To be chosen. To have your Alpha look at you and say, before the moon herself, you are mine and I am yours, and nothing will undo that. Zara was a seer wolf. She had always known things she wasn't supposed to know, felt things through touch, glimpsed moments that hadn't happened yet, sensed the truth beneath what people said. She had known, for instance, that her mother had kept a secret so heavy it had bent the shape of her entire life. She had known, the first time she pressed her palm to the ancient pack stone, that something about her bloodline was different. And she had known, 3 weeks ago, when Caden Voss pressed his forehead to hers beneath the harvest moon and whispered, "You are my forever," that something in his voice didn't match the look in his eyes. She had told herself she was wrong. She had wanted so badly to be wrong. Alpha Caden Voss walked toward her now through the parted crowd, and every wolf in the hall went still. He was the kind of man who made rooms quiet when he entered them, not through cruelty, but through sheer presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of contained power that made you aware of your own smallness without him doing a single thing about it. His jaw was set. His silver ceremonial coat was pressed and correct. His dark eyes moved over the hall with the trained authority of a man who had been Alpha since the age of 23. He did not smile when he saw her. He moved like a man walking toward a verdict. Not a vow. Zara's seer gift stirred beneath her skin. She pressed it down. Not now. Not tonight. Tonight, she wanted to be just a woman in a beautiful gown, waiting for the man she loved to choose her. The High Elder stepped forward, ancient and silver-haired, her voice carrying the particular stillness of someone who had spoken these words 100 times and still felt their weight. By the light of the moon and the witness of the pack, the elder began, We gather to bind what the goddess has joined. Alpha, come forward and make your claim. Caden took his position across from Zara. She reached for his hand. He pulled back. Not dramatically. Not violently. Just back. One single step. Barely perceptible to the crowd. But to Zara, standing close enough to see the muscle working in his jaw, close enough to smell the cedar and iron of his skin, it was the loudest thing she had ever heard. I cannot bind myself, he said, to a wolf who carries another pack's bloodline. The hall went utterly silent. Zara blinked. The words reached her in pieces, the way terrible things always do, the brain kindly spacing them out so the body can absorb the blow. What? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. She hadn't meant to speak at all. Caden did not meet her eyes. He spoke to the hall instead, to the elder, to the 400 wolves watching from the benches, anywhere but her face. The council has uncovered evidence that Zara's mother was born to the Ashenvale pack. By Ireblood law, that makes her bloodline impure. The pack cannot be bound to a mixed line Luna. Our alliance with the Goldspire pack depends on a pure blood claim. A sound moved through the hall like wind through grass, not quite a gasp, not quite a murmur. Something between shock and the horrible relief that comes from watching a catastrophe happen to someone else. The elder's composure did not crack. But her hands, Zara noticed, had gone very still against her ceremonial staff. Zara's gift surged without warning, raw and unasked for, the way it always moved when her emotions broke the leash she kept them on. Her hand shot out and caught the altar railing to steady herself. The moment her skin touched the old carved wood, the vision hit her like cold water. Caden alone. A gray lodge, a silent hall, a pack that grew quieter year by year. An alliance that rotted from the inside out. A man sitting at a fire that gave no warmth, staring at a doorway that stayed empty. 8 years. 10. Older and colder and hollowed out by the weight of a choice he could never undo. She wrenched her hand from the railing. The hall came back in a rush of candlelight and held breath. Caden was still speaking. Something about the council's decision, about duty, about the pack's need for a strong alliance. The words washed over her like water over stone, present, but not penetrating. She looked at him. Really looked. Past the silver coat and the practiced authority and the tight jaw. She looked at the man who had whispered her name in the dark and meant it. The man whose hands had been gentle with her in ways that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with choice. He was still in there. She could see him. And he was ash with shame. He had known. Before tonight. He had known, and he had let her walk up this aisle. She did not cry. That was the thing none of them expected. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin to a height that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with survival. And she looked at Caden Voss for the last time like a woman who had just been handed the exact tool she needed to build something he would never be able to take from her. You just rejected the only wolf who could have saved you, she said, quiet enough that only he could hear. Then she turned, and she walked out of the bonding hall. Head high. Heart in pieces so small she couldn't feel the edges of them. Behind her, every candle in the room blew out at once. Chapter 2. The Run. Midnight found her at the edge of everything she had ever known. The road that marked the outer border of Ireblood territory was slick with rain, a cold, hard rain that had started the moment she crossed the tree line, as though the sky had been waiting for her. She ran through it barefoot, the silver gown already muddy to the knee, her breath tearing in and out of her chest in ragged pulls that left nothing for thinking. Only moving. Only forward. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. The rejection mark burned on her collarbone where a claiming mark should have gone. But this was different from what she'd heard described. Claimed wolves said the mark ran warm, like a hand always pressed to your skin. Hers ran cold. A cold so particular it had a taste, like winter iron, like the inside of an empty room. The moon's way of marking a seer wolf that had been abandoned. She had read about it once, in one of the old texts the pack's archivist kept locked in the lower library. She'd thought it was folklore. She pressed her hand over it now and tried to remember how the text had described it, what it meant, what came next. Her mind kept sliding off the thought like feet on whetstone. Behind her. Still, somehow, too close, the drums had started. They rolled through the forest in waves, deep and celebratory, the sound of a pack marking a new alliance sealed. Of a new Luna welcomed. Of a door closed. She ran harder. Her wolf, Ember, raged inside her. Not with grief, there would be time for grief later, in some small room somewhere, when the running was done and the silence came to collect what was owed. Ember raged with something older than grief, something that didn't have clean edges. A primal, ancestral fury that frightened Zara a little, because she'd never felt it before. It was the anger of something sacred that had been carelessly discarded. The anger of the moon herself, working through the animal that carried her mark. 3 weeks ago, she thought. 3 weeks ago, his hands were in my hair. She pressed that thought flat, ground it under her heel, left it in the mud behind her. She stumbled at the last border stone. The old granite marker that separated Ire Bloodland from the open human world beyond, and caught herself on the rough surface, palms stinging. She stood there a moment, breathing. The pack's territory was at her back. The road ahead was dark and ordinary and smelled of exhaust and wet pavement and the particular indifferent freedom of a world that did not know or care what kind of creature she was. Her seer gift surged without warning. She'd had visions before that felt like looking through a window. This one felt like being thrown through one. 3 boys. Silver-eyed, fierce, and laughing, the particular unself-conscious laugh of children who don't yet know the world has edges. They ran through firelight, tumbling over each other, calling to someone out of frame. One of them turned and looked directly at her across whatever impossible distance separated the vision from the present moment. He had dark eyes and a jaw she recognized. His expression was so certain, so calm, that it made her chest ache with something she had no word for yet. She wrenched herself back, stood at the border stone in the rain, gasping. Her hands went to her stomach, an instinctive gesture, not yet conscious, not yet understood. No, she said, to no one. To the rain. To the moon, who was watching. I can't, that's not. She didn't finish the thought. She buried it 6 feet deep, turned her face to the dark road ahead, and crossed the border into the human world before she could change her mind. The moon hung low and swollen as she disappeared into the ordinary dark. She did not look back. She didn't need to. Her gift had already shown her enough. Whatever came next, it would not be survival. It would be war. Chapter 3. 3 Sons of the Moon. 8 years had a way of softening the things you didn't want to think about. Not healing, softening. The way a stone is smoothed by water over time, still hard, still present, just less likely to cut. The small coastal town of Thorn Hollow was the kind of place where no one asked where you came from. It sat at the edge of the world with its back to the ocean and its face to a forest that no pack had claimed in living memory, and it minded its own business with a commitment that Zara had found, 8 years ago, deeply and profoundly beautiful. Her workshop occupied the 2 rooms above the old bookshop on Market Lane, one for sleeping, one for everything else. The everything else room smelled permanently of dried sage, cedar resin, beeswax candles, and the particular aged paper scent of the books she restored for collectors who never asked why her hands seemed to always know where a book was damaged before she opened it. Herbs hung in bundles from the low ceiling. Her work table was layered with wards carved into the wood itself, invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. She had built a quiet life here. A hidden life. It was a good life. Some days she even believed that. Below her, in the bookshop's back room, the argument had reached its natural peak. "That's mine," Jasper announced, with the absolute conviction of a youngest child who had never successfully laid claim to anything in his life. "It was yours," Eli corrected, in the flat, patient tone of the eldest who had been navigating this specific argument for approximately 6 of his 8 years. "You left it on the stairs. Stairs are neutral territory." "That's not a rule." "It is now." Zara paused at the top of the stairs with her tea and took them in for a moment, the way she did every morning, a private cataloging she never wanted to stop needing. Eli, her eldest, her mirror, crouched by the window with the focused stillness of a boy twice his age, carving something small and deliberate from a piece of driftwood. He had her dark eyes and Caden's jaw, a combination that still occasionally caught her off guard. He was already protective in ways that went beyond his years, the kind of child who always sat with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. His wolf stirred just beneath his skin sometimes, trying to surface, pressing against the wards she'd placed on all 3 boys before they could walk. Rose sat cross-legged on the floor at the center of the room, not arguing, not reading, not doing anything a human observer could have named. He was the quiet one. The one who listened to things no one else could hear, who sometimes answered questions she hadn't spoken aloud, who had told her last winter, in the same mild tone he used for everything, that the ocean was going to be angry for 3 days before the storm ever arrived. He had her mother's eyes, gray and deep and slightly too still for comfort. His gift was the one that frightened her most, because it was the one she understood least. And Jasper, her youngest, her loudest, her exhausting heart, had abandoned the argument in favor of using a broken chair leg as a sword. He was small and quick and full of a reckless joy that Zara spent a considerable amount of her parenting energy trying not to crush. His wolf was already trying to speak. Last month she'd found him behind the house with his hands flat on the earth, pulling something from the soil, not magic, exactly, but the precursor to it. A reaching. A calling. Each boy bore a faint silver crescent on their left wrist, hidden beneath the wards she'd layered there like second skin. The marks had been there since birth. She'd kept them warded, kept the boys shielded, kept them fed and safe and warm and blessedly, carefully anonymous in a town that didn't know what wolves were. She had been so careful. Her first client of the morning arrived at 9 with a cardboard box and the look of someone trying not to seem excited. A compass. Old, really old. The brass worn smooth at the edges, the glass face slightly fogged, the needle trembling even on the flat table. Belonged to my great-grandmother, the man said. I'm not sure what I want to do with it. Just curious what you think. Zara thought, don't touch it. She always thought that, just before she did. She picked up the compass. The vision arrived like a blade. Wolves on a road, silver-crested, moving fast, 4 of them. Not running. Tracking. The specific focused movement of scouts with a scent. Behind them, barely visible in the tree line, a 5th figure, taller, broader, holding very still in the way that dominant wolves do when they don't want to be seen moving. She couldn't see his face. She didn't need to. She could feel his presence the same way she'd always been able to, a pressure in the chest, a particular resonance, like a note played on an instrument tuned to the same key as her. They were on the coastal road. They were close. She set the compass down gently and apologized to the man with a smile she didn't feel and showed him to the door with a courtesy she was operating on autopilot, and the moment the latch clicked she was already moving, pulling wards from the walls. Reaching for the boys' travel bags on the high shelf, running her mental checklist of everything she would need and everything she would have to leave behind. Not again. But it was always again. It had always been again. Mom. Rose stood in the doorway of the workshop. His voice was mild. His eyes were not. Someone is dreaming about us. Zara's hands stilled on the wardstone. Who, she said. Not a question. Ro tilted his head slightly, in that way he had when he was listening to something just out of reach. The big wolf. The sad one. He doesn't know our names yet. A pause. But he's learning. Chapter 4. Alpha without peace. The lodge was dark. Caden Voss preferred it that way at this hour. No candles, no fire, just the cold gray light of 3 in the morning coming through the tall windows and lying flat across the stone floor. The whiskey sat on the mantel untouched. He'd poured it 2 hours ago and hadn't wanted it since, which was the problem with whiskey. It only worked if you were trying to feel less. He'd stopped trying to feel less about 8 years ago, and the habit had died with everything else. He stood at the window and looked at his territory. The Ire blood pack spread out beneath the ridge in silver and shadow, the cluster of the main settlement, the training grounds, the Elders' Hall, the bonding temple standing pale and quiet at the hill's edge. 300 years of his bloodline's work carved into this land. His grandfather's name was in the claiming hall walls. His father's. His own. It should have been enough. He had told himself for 8 years that it was enough. The Goldspire Alliance had collapsed within 2 years. The Luna, a cool, practical woman named Petra who had wanted the Alliance more than she'd wanted him, had left with civilized mutual acknowledgement and the eastern trade routes and half of what should have been his pack's future. He couldn't blame her. He hadn't given her anything worth staying for. The Ashenvale pack had begun expanding into the disputed mountain territory 6 months after that, emboldened by the cracks in his political standing. 2 minor packs on the western border had stopped returning his council's correspondence. His beta, Marcus, handled most of the pack administration now with a patience that was beginning to shade into something uncomfortably close to management. Caden was alpha in name and in power. But power, he had learned, did not keep the dark from being dark. He hadn't slept properly in weeks. Every night it was the same. A forest he didn't recognize, firelight he couldn't reach, and 3 silver-eyed boys running through the dark with their heads thrown back, laughing the way children laugh when they don't yet know what there is to be afraid of. And a woman with her back to him. Always her back. He was always too far away, or she was always too close to the light, or the dream simply refused to let him see what he already knew. He was always reaching. He never arrived. Marcus knocked once and entered without waiting, the particular privilege of a beta who had earned the right through 12 years of cleaning up after his alpha's consequences. The seers want an audience in the morning, Marcus said. No preamble. They'd stopped using preamble with each other somewhere around year 3. They've been tracking an anomaly for 2 weeks. They say they were certain before, but now they're certain. Very certain. Caden turned from the window. Tell me. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That particular silence, the one his beta used when he was deciding how to say something that couldn't be unsaid, settled in the room like smoke. A blood signature, he said at last. Voss line. Coming from the direction of the human coast. Faint, muted somehow, like something's been placed over it, but unmistakable to the senior seers. Caden said nothing. 3 signatures, Marcus continued. His voice was careful as hands carrying glass. Possibly more, but the seers are confident in 3 distinct sources. They believe they are young. Children, from the strength and pattern of it. The room was very still. And dominant, Marcus finished. Alpha strain, all 3. Every one. The glass on the mantel cracked. Caden hadn't touched it. He hadn't moved. But the whiskey glass cracked clean down the middle and sat there, held together only by its own surface tension, in 2 neat halves. He registered distantly that his hand was gripping the windowsill hard enough to leave impressions in the wood. 3, he said. The word arrived in his mouth without his permission. Yes, Alpha. The old prophecy moved through his mind with the particular cruelty of things heard in childhood and never quite forgotten, whispered by the pack's oldest seer at his father's fireside, in that flat recitative tone seers used for things that were already written. 3 born of rejection. 3 bound by the moon. 3 to unmake what pride has made, and from its ruins, build what endures. He'd thought it was a warning about his enemies. He'd never once thought it might be about his own blood. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in 8 years. Not once. It was the only rule he had kept without bending since the night of the bonding ceremony, the one small act of discipline he'd managed in the wreckage of everything else. As though not saying it could contain what it meant. As though keeping the word behind his teeth could preserve some version of a man who hadn't done what he'd done. But now, standing in the dark of a lodge that had never felt like a home, in the ruins of everything his pride had built. He said it to the dark. Not loudly. Almost gently. Zara. And somewhere across the coast, in a small workshop above a bookshop that smelled of sage and beeswax and careful, well-constructed quiet, a ward stone on the windowsill cracked clean in half. Chapter 5, The Wolves at the Door. She had done this before. That was the terrible thing about packing. She'd done it enough times that it no longer felt like panic. It felt like muscle memory. Her hands knew the order, the ward stones first, pulled from their sockets in the walls and wrapped in oilcloth. Then the boys' things, already sorted into 3 small bags, she kept repacked within an hour of arriving anywhere new. Then her own. 2 minutes, start to finish, if she moved without thinking. She had learned to move without thinking. The workshop looked emptier than it ever had. Herbs still hanging, candles still burning. She'd have to leave them. She'd left things like that before. The boys knew the drill. Eli appeared in the doorway of the workshop within 30 seconds of hearing her pull the first ward stone, bag already over his shoulder, jaw already set. He didn't ask questions. He'd stopped asking questions at age 6, which should have broken her heart and instead had made her fiercely, savagely proud of the person he was becoming. Jasper arrived a minute later, still pulling on his boot, loudly narrating his objection to being woken before dawn for the 4th time in 2 years. Ro came last, quiet and already dressed, as though he'd known before she had. He probably had. The ward stone on the windowsill, the one that had cracked clean in half an hour ago, was still warm to the touch. Zara wrapped it carefully and pressed it to the bottom of her bag. It had cracked from the outside in. That meant someone on the other side hadn't just found their general direction. They had said her name with enough force to reach through her own protections. They needed to be gone before dawn. The knock came at the back door with 10 minutes to spare. 3 beats. Slow and deliberate, like a metronome. Like someone who had all the time in the world and wanted her to know it. Zara was across the room before the 3rd beat finished, the carved bone dagger from her hip already in her hand. She positioned herself so the door's swing would put it between her and whoever was outside. Old habits. Good ones. Hide, she said, without turning around. Eli grabbed his brothers and moved. She opened the door. The woman standing in the pre-dawn fog was tall, dark-cloaked, and bearing the mark of a pack Zara hadn't seen in 8 years, a crescent bisected by a vertical line, burned faintly into the inside of the wrist in the way old bloodline packs still marked their own. The Ashenvale crest. Her mother's pack. The pack Zara had been rejected for belonging to. Zara Cole, the woman said. She had a low, steady voice and the particular stillness of a wolf who wasn't easily rattled. My name is Nadia. I'm your cousin. 2nd degree, through your mother's sister. I know you don't know me. I need 60 seconds of your time before you try to close this door. Zara didn't lower the dagger. You have 40. The Ashenvale elder died 3 nights ago. You're next in the bloodline. The pack is yours to claim if you want it. Safe ground, warded borders, people who will protect your children without needing to know what they are. But you have to come now. She paused. Before the Ireblood scouts get here first. The fog moved between them. How did you find us? Zara asked. Nadia's gaze shifted. Just slightly. Just past Zara's shoulder. Your son, she said quietly. The quiet one. He sent a vision to our seer last night. He asked for help. Zara turned slowly. Rose stood at the base of the stairs. Chin up. Eyes clear. Not apologetic in the slightest. We needed allies, Mom, he said, with the calm certainty of a child who has calculated 12 moves ahead and found them all satisfactory. For a long moment, Zara couldn't find words. 8 years of careful, painstaking invisibility, and her 8-year-old son had undone it in a single night because he'd decided, on his own, that they needed something more than hiding. She couldn't even tell him he was wrong. A howl broke through the morning mist before she could speak. Not Ashenvale. She knew Ashenvale. This was deeper. This was dominant. The particular resonant frequency of a wolf whose authority came not from training but from blood. Iron blood. They were already here. Chapter 6, First Contact. Zara stepped outside alone. She pulled the door shut behind her, leaving Nadia with the boys, and walked out into the gray morning fog of Thorn Hollow's back alley with her dagger at her side and her seer gift pressed flat against the inside of her ribs. She could hear the main street 2 buildings over, a bread cart, a dog, the particular unremarkable sound of human mourning, and the distance between that ordinary world and what was about to happen in this alley felt like the thinnest possible membrane. She felt him before she heard him. That was always how it had been, not sight, not sound, but pressure. A specific compression in her chest, like a hand pressed flat against her sternum from the inside. Her seer gift recognized him the way tuning forks recognize each other, not consciously, not willingly, just physics. Two things resonating at the same frequency whether either of them wanted it or not. Her wolf, Ember, went absolutely still. Not frightened. Waiting. He came out of the mist the way dominant wolves always moved, like the fog parted for him because it had decided to, not because he'd asked. 8 years had not softened him. If anything, they had done the opposite. Taken the controlled power she remembered and compressed it, removed everything decorative, left only the essential. He looked like a man who had been making hard choices long enough that the hardness had become structural. He stopped when he saw her. 12 feet of wet cobblestone between them. His eyes found her face and stayed there. Zara. Her name in his voice, after 8 years of silence, was an entirely different thing than she had prepared herself for. She had prepared for anger, for authority, for the particular cold formality of an alpha conducting pack business. She had not prepared for the way he said it rough-edged, like a word kept somewhere it shouldn't have been kept for too long. She kept her chin level, her grip on the dagger loose and ready. "You need to turn around," she said. "Get back on whatever road you came from and keep walking. I know about them. You don't know anything. I know there are 3 of them." A muscle moved in his jaw. "I know they carry my blood. And I know something is hunting them, something that isn't my pack, isn't any pack, and has been moving toward this town for 2 weeks." That landed. Because her seer gift had been whispering the same thing at the edges of her visions for weeks, just past what she could clearly see. A formless dark with patience in it. Something that moved without urgency because it had never needed to hurry. She didn't show it. "You have 10 seconds, she said. "Tell me why I shouldn't take my children and walk the other direction." He took 1 step forward. Just one. And stopped. "Because this time," he said, voice quiet enough that it didn't carry beyond them, "I am not asking for the council's permission." The fog moved between them. The bread cart rattled on the main street. Somewhere a bird called once and went quiet. Zara held his gaze and said nothing, because she was doing what she always did when she needed to think clearly. She was listening past the words to the thing underneath them. And underneath Caden Voss's voice, past 8 years of guilt and authority and sleepless nights that had carved him into someone new, she heard what she hadn't expected to hear. She heard the truth. She hated that she could still do that. The back door opened. She knew without turning. She always knew which one of her sons was behind her by the quality of the silence they carried into a room. This silence was dense and deliberate and slightly furious. Eli stepped to her side. He planted his feet the way she'd seen her own wolf plant them, a child's body running an alpha's instinct, already placing himself at the edge of what he considered his territory. His dark eyes found Caden and went narrow and measuring in a way that had nothing to do with 8 years old. Caden's gaze moved from Zara to her son. The breath left his body slowly. Very slowly. Like a man who had been holding it for longer than he knew. He looked at Eli's jaw. His own jaw. He looked at Eli's eyes, her eyes, dark and level and giving nothing away. He looked at the small silver crescent peeking from under the boy's sleeve, barely visible, and something happened in his face that Zara had no category for. Not guilt, not wonder, not grief, but some violent mixture of all 3 that had never had a name because most people were lucky enough never to need one. Neither of them spoke. The mist rolled in between them, cold and thick and trembling with everything that had never been said. Chapter 7, The Shadow Collector. They moved inside before the town woke fully Caden, Zara, the boys, Nadia, the kind of uneasy coalition that forms when external threat overrides internal objection. The bookshop's back room smelled of old paper and Zara's wards, and it was too small for all of them, and no one sat down. Caden stood by the far wall with his arms at his sides in the deliberate stillness of a man who was very carefully not doing anything that could be construed as claiming space. He was watching the boys. Not hungrily, not the way Zara had braced herself for. More like a man looking at damage he'd caused and refusing the comfort of looking away from it. The boys watched him back. Jasper had already decided he was interesting and was failing to pretend otherwise. Eli had already decided he was a problem and was failing to pretend otherwise. Ro was simply watching, in the way Ro watched everything, as though he was reading a text in a language he already knew but was being careful about. Zara was trying to decide what to do next when Caden moved, not toward the boys, toward her. His hand closed around her wrist before she could step back, not hard, barely a pressure, but her seer gift detonated. Black fog. Not darkness, something that consumed darkness. A vast and patient silence shaped like hunger. And in the center of it, enormous and still, something that had once been a wolf turning toward her with the slow, awful deliberateness of a thing that has not needed to hurry in a very long time. It had no eyes. Only the spaces where eyes had been. Two voids, deep and old, and in them she could see the faintest traces of light. Stolen light. Consumed light. The remnants of gifts that had once belonged to other wolves, other seers, other children exactly like her sons, absorbed and incorporated and still faintly, horribly alive inside the thing that had taken them. It turned toward her. And it smiled, though it had no mouth, because it already knew she was looking. She came back gasping, Caden's hands on her shoulders, his eyes frantic in a way that cut through 8 years of everything and reached something she wasn't ready to have reached. What did you see? She steadied herself, took a breath, found the words in the correct order. Something old, she said. Something that was stripped of its wolf and has been building itself back together ever since. It doesn't want to kill them. She looked at him and made sure he understood what she was about to say. It wants to wear them. One gift at a time, until it's whole again. The room went very quiet. How long? Caden asked. I don't know. But it's been patient long enough that another week doesn't trouble it. She pulled back from his hands. Which means we can't afford patience at all. That night, she lay awake listening to the boys breathe in the next room, running contingencies, mapping exits, calculating which wards could be rebuilt fastest in unfamiliar territory. Jasper's scream came at 2 a.m. She was in the doorway before the sound finished. He was sitting up in his cot, eyes wide and unseeing, the way children look when the dream hasn't fully released them yet. She crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled him close, and he was shaking, and he was fine, and it was fine. And then she saw his wrist. The silver crescent mark had gone black at the edges. Not slowly. Not gradually. As though something had pressed a cold thumb against it from the outside and held it there. The hollow had not been waiting for them to lower their guard. It had already been here. It had simply been introducing itself. Chapter 8, Broken Ground. The Ashenvale's hidden sanctuary was 3 hours into the forest and older than anyone living could remember. An ancient grove, the kind that had been warded so many times by so many generations that the wards had become structural, woven into the root systems of the trees themselves, humming faintly at a frequency just below human hearing, but perfectly audible to anything with wolf blood. It smelled of iron and crushed pine and the particular heaviness of old protective magic. The torch brackets had been carved from living wood and never replaced. The fire in them burned amber. The Ashenvale wolves waiting inside looked at Caden the way prey looks at a predator that has wandered into the wrong territory, not yet violent, but deciding. He bore it without comment. Zara watched him navigate the Ashenvale wolves' open hostility with a restraint she hadn't expected from the man she remembered. 2 of them challenged him directly, low growls, deliberate shoulder positioning, the unmistakable language of wolves establishing that this was not his ground. The old Caden, the one who had chosen political calculation over the woman standing at his altar, would have answered that with his alpha dominance, and the resulting standoff would have broken the alliance before it started. This Caden stepped back, made himself smaller, let them have the ground. She didn't know what to do with that, so she filed it somewhere she'd deal with later and focused on the boys. Jasper had attached himself to Nadia, who was answering his questions about the sanctuary with admirable patience. Ro had found a corner and was sitting in it with his eyes half closed and his palms flat on the earthen floor, listening to whatever the grove's roots were saying. Eli had positioned himself 4 feet from Caden and slightly behind him, which was either a protective instinct Zara found alarming or a territorial one she found equally alarming. Dinner was dried meat and flatbread and a tea the Ashenvale elders prepared from bark and dried flowers that tasted like the forest floor and worked like a sedative on exhausted muscles. The boys ate without complaint, which told her everything about how tired they were. Caden sat beside Eli at the long table. They didn't speak for almost 20 minutes. Then Jasper, who had no patience for unspoken things and an 8-year-old's complete immunity to social tension, climbed onto the bench on Caden's other side and looked up at him with the focused curiosity of a boy who had decided something was interesting and was going to investigate it properly. "Did you know about us?" he asked. "Before." A beat of silence. "No," Caden said. His voice was even. He looked at Jasper without looking away, which Zara noted. Some adults couldn't hold the direct gaze of a child who was assessing them. But I should have looked harder. Jasper considered this with great seriousness. Then he went back to his food, satisfied, as though the matter were now resolved. Eli said nothing, but the 4 feet between him and Caden became 3. Zara pulled Caden outside after dinner. "Don't do that," she said, keeping her voice low. "Do what?" "Be honest with them. Be present. Make them want you." She met his eyes. "You don't get to walk in after 8 years and become their hero. That's not how this works." He was quiet for a moment. The amber torchlight moved across the planes of his face. "I know," he said. "I'm not trying to be their hero." A breath. "I'm trying to be their father." The silence that followed had weight and edges and no good way through it. The grove's ward screamed to life at midnight. Every carved stone blazed white simultaneously. Not the warm amber of the torches, but something cold and absolute, the light of protections pushed to their maximum. The ground shook once. A pause. Then again. Then a third time, each impact arriving in perfect, patient rhythm. Like a heartbeat. Like something that had learned to time its strikes to something biological because it found that more effective. In the center of the grove, Zara reached the boys' quarters in 4 seconds. All 3 of them were already awake, already upright, silver eyes wide open and burning in the dark. And glowing. Chapter 9, The Cost of Power. The outer ward broke on the 5th strike. The sound it made was not an explosion, it was a silence, a sudden and total absence of the protective hum that had been present since they arrived, and the silence was somehow louder than any explosion could have been. Every wolf in the grove felt it in their chests, a dropping away, like a floor disappearing. The carved wolves came through the gap immediately. That was what the Ashenvale elders called them, carved. Former wolves, former seers, from whom the Hollow had taken everything that made them specific, memory, gift, will, self. What remained was functional but empty. They moved with the terrible efficiency of bodies that no longer had anything to protect, no pain threshold to manage, no self-preservation to slow them down. They came in fast and from 3 directions. Caden shifted before the first of them crossed the grove's inner line, not the strategic, measured shift of an alpha who had decided to engage, but the instantaneous, non-negotiated response of a wolf whose children were in the building behind him. Gold fur. Mass. The particular controlled fury of a dominant animal who has found, perhaps for the first time, a thing worth protecting that isn't an abstraction. Zara shifted 2 seconds later on the grove's eastern side, her white wolf blazing under the torchlight, moving to intercept the second wave. The Ashenvale wolves held the perimeter. Nadia coordinated them with the clipped efficiency of a beta who had run defensive operations before. They were holding. Barely. The boys were supposed to stay in the inner quarters. Zara had looked Eli in the eye and said stay, and she had seen him decide to comply, and she had trusted that decision. And she had been wrong to trust it because Eli's compliance was always conditional on the threat level remaining below whatever internal threshold he'd set. And apparently that threshold had been crossed when a carved wolf breached the inner ward and moved toward the room where his brothers were sleeping. Eli shifted. 8 years old. The shift was involuntary. That much was clear from the sound he made, a sharp exhale of shock and pain as his body did something it wasn't quite ready for, the wards she'd placed on him burning away like paper in flame. Gold fur, lighter than his father's, smaller, but dense with a dominance particular quality of presence. He placed himself between the carved wolf and his brothers, and he did not move. The carved wolf stopped. Not because of size. Not because of strength. Because Eli's alpha dominance, untrained and uncontrolled and running completely on instinct, was a raw force that even a hollowed-out shell of a wolf recognized at some level below thought. The carved wolf went down. Slowly. Like a marionette with its strings cut. Ro came from the room behind him. His eyes were silver-white and very calm. He crossed to the carved wolf without hesitation and pressed both hands against the side of its face. Something happened that Zara, shifting back to reach them, had no language for. Ro pushed a vision into the carved wolf's mind. Not a warning, not an attack, a memory. He found what remained of who the wolf had been before the hollow took it, and he showed it to the empty place where a self should have been. He witnessed it. Held it up. Said, without words, "This was you. This existed. This mattered." The carved wolf made a sound. It was the most human sound Zara had ever heard from anything in wolf form, and it had no category in her experience, and it broke something open in the grove that she felt in her sternum. Then Jasper pushed past his brothers and pressed his small palms flat against the wolf's chest. And pulled. The way you pull a splinter, careful, specific, finding the exact angle. His face went white with effort, his nose bleeding almost immediately from the exertion, and Zara reached for him to stop him, and then stopped herself, because the thing he was doing was working, a thread of light, faint and trembling, drawing free from the carved wolf's chest like a pulled stitch. The fragment of gift the hollow had taken. Coming back. The carved wolf collapsed. Not dead. Freed. Its eyes cleared like fever breaking. Complete silence in the grove. Every wolf staring at three boys who had just done something none of them had words for. Caden stood 4 feet away, chest heaving, blood on his hands from the fight, and looked at his sons with an expression that held so many things simultaneously that none of them won. Zara understood, for the first time, what the moon goddess had actually built. Not heirs. Not weapons. Not children to be protected while the adults fought. A key. 3 parts of a single key. And the lock was the hollow itself. Together, they were the only force in existence capable of unmaking it completely. Which meant the hollow would not stop. Not ever. Not until it consumed them, or they destroyed it. And outside the grove's shattered outer ward, in the dark that had gone very still in the way that deep water goes still before something rises through it, something laughed. Not a wolf sound. Not a human sound. The sound of something very old that has just confirmed something it had only suspected. Chapter 10. What broken things become. Dawn arrived slowly as though it, too, was unsure of its reception. Thin gold light filtered through the grove's canopy and lay in quiet strips across the earthen floor. The Ashenvale wolves moved through the aftermath of the night with the careful deliberateness of people sorting through damage to see what was salvageable. The freed carved wolf, a woman, as it turned out early 30s, who had been missing from a coastal pack for 4 years, sat wrapped in blankets by the central fire with one of the elders, not speaking, relearning what it felt like to be the only voice in her own head. Ro had checked on her 3 times already. The second time, she had recognized him and reached for his hand, and he had let her hold it, and neither of them had spoken. Jasper slept with a nosebleed-stained cloth still pressed to his face, deeply, as though unconscious were the only adequate response to what he'd done. Eli sat at the grove's edge with his driftwood carving, working at it with the focused silence of a boy processing things he didn't have words for yet. Zara found the spring at the sanctuary's western edge a small, clear pool fed from underground, cold enough to ache. She sat at its edge and looked at her reflection and did not particularly like what she saw, a woman held together entirely by the refusal to come apart in front of her children. She heard Caden approach. She didn't tell him to leave. He sat beside her, leaving a careful distance between them, and said nothing. For a long time. Long enough that the grove birds came back and the morning resumed around them. "Say what you need to say," he said at last. "All of it. I won't defend myself and I won't leave." She had thought, over 8 years, about what she would say to him if she ever had the chance. She'd had entire conversations with him in her head. Sharp, devastating, precisely worded, landing exactly as intended. What came out was not that. She told him about the road in the rain. About crossing into human territory with nothing but a torn gown and the fragment of a vision she was terrified to look at clearly. She told him about the first winter in Thorn Hollow, which had been genuinely dangerous in ways she'd never admitted to anyone because there was no one to admit it to. About giving birth alone with a midwife she'd met 2 weeks prior in a rented room in January, and how she'd made the decision, in those hours, that she would never let her children feel the specific quality of that aloneness. Not if there was a single thing she could do about it. She told him about the first time Eli asked why he didn't have a father, and how she'd given an answer that was true but not complete, and how Eli had accepted it with the particular grace of a child who knows they're being protected from something and decides to allow it, and how that grace had been harder to carry than anger would have been. She told him about packing and running. About the way her hands had stopped shaking the 4th time, and how that felt like losing something she couldn't name. Caden listened to all of it without interrupting. His jaw tightened in places. His hands, she noticed, had closed into fists on his knees and stayed there. When she finished, the grove was fully light and the spring was absolutely still. "I was a coward dressed up as an alpha," he said. His voice was flat and even and entirely without self-pity, which was the only way she could have heard it. "I chose the approval of people who would have discarded me the moment I was inconvenient over the one thing the goddess had given me that was actually mine. And I have spent 8 years being exactly as miserable as I deserve." A pause. "But I'm not here to ask you to care about that." "Then what are you here for?" "To be useful," he said simply. "For as long as you'll allow it. And when this is done, whatever you decide after that, I'll accept." She looked at him for a long time. The spring's surface rippled. No wind. No movement. The water turned dark. Her seer gift detonated without warning, not the controlled activation she'd spent years learning to manage, but a full, involuntary flood, her eyes going white at the edges, the vision arriving with the force of something that had been held back too long. The hollow. Not in the darkness this time. Not at a distance. Moving through the forest toward the grove with the deliberate pace of something that has stopped waiting. Its void where eyes should be turned directly toward her across whatever impossible gap separated vision from present, and she understood, with the particular clarity of a seer who is receiving something as a warning and not as a suggestion, that it was already here. It had been here since dawn. It had simply been watching them grieve. She came back, grabbed Caden's arm. "It's here," she said. "Right now. The wards are gone." He was already moving. And at the grove's edge, every remaining ward stone turned to ash simultaneously, drifting down through the morning light like gray snow. Chapter 11, Moonfire. The hollow arrived the way great cold arrives, not as a single event, but as a progressive absence. The amber torchlight dimmed. The grove birds went silent. The spring surface stilled to something beyond stillness, something that had no word, a condition of absolute suspended breath. Then it stepped into the grove. It had form, if form was the right word for something that seemed less to occupy space than to negate it. Wolf-shaped, enormous, moving with a fluid patience that made every other movement in the grove look frantic by comparison. Where its body passed, the grass went gray. The frost formed in its wake on a morning that had been warm 3 minutes ago. Its void eyes moved over the grove once. Cataloging. Unhurried. Settled on the boys. Caden moved first. He shifted mid-stride, the fastest Zara had ever seen him do it, not the controlled 2-second process, but a single explosive motion. And he hit the hollow at full speed and full force. The hollow didn't stumble, didn't deflect. It let him hit it, and then it was simply somewhere else, and Caden was on the ground, and it was still moving toward the boys. He got up, hit it again, and again. Not because it was working. because his children were behind him, and stopping wasn't a category he had access to right now. The Ashenvale wolves engaged from the flanks. 2 went down hard within seconds. The hollow barely turned to address them, a gesture so casual it was more insulting than violent. Nadia held the eastern edge, driving 2 of the hollow's smaller extensions, echoes, fragments of its absorbed mass that moved independently, back toward the tree line. Zara shifted. Her white wolf blazed in the dimming light, and she threw herself at the nearest echo with everything she had, buying yards, buying seconds, all of it bought in the only currency available, which was her own body. It was not enough. None of it was going to be enough, and she knew it, and she kept going anyway because the alternative was unthinkable. The hollow reached the boys. Jasper was in front. Of course he was. Jasper had never met a threat he responded to by stepping back, which was both the thing that would get him killed someday, and the reason he had freed a carved wolf the night before when no adult in the grove had known it was possible. He raised his hands. The hollow paused. That was the first time it had paused. Eli stepped up beside his brother. His shift was controlled this time, deliberate. He planted his gold wolf between Jasper and the hollow and held, dominance blazing at a frequency that should have been physically impossible for a child his size. The grove's roots themselves seemed to respond, the earthen floor under his paws thrumming, the surviving wardwood in the trees above beginning to glow faintly with the resonance of it. Roe completed the line on Jasper's other side. He did not shift. He pressed his hands to his brothers' backs, one hand to Eli, one to Jasper, and closed his eyes, and did what Roe did. He listened. He found the frequency underneath everything. The original note. The tone of what the 3 of them were, together, at the level below gift and beyond blood. And he gave it back to them. The hollow reacted. For the first time, it moved backward. One step, involuntary, the motion of something encountering a force it had not accounted for. Its void eyes fixed on the 3 boys with something that looked, disturbingly, like recognition. The hollow turned its full force toward Jasper. He was the extractor, the hollow knew it, had always known it, had been waiting for a moment of distraction. It moved with speed it hadn't shown before, a sudden violent lunge, the void pressing toward Jasper's chest where his gift lived. Zara shifted back to human and ran. She reached him first, placed herself between Jasper and the hollow, and opened her seer gift completely, deliberately, recklessly, fully. No controls. No managed activation. Everything she'd spent 15 years carefully regulating, thrown open like a door torn from its hinges. The gift ran through her like a current through wire. And she showed the hollow everything. Every wolf it had taken. Every gift consumed. Every person erased. She didn't attack with it, she witnessed. She held each stolen life up the way Roe had held the carved wolf's memory, and she said, in the silent language of a seer running at full capacity, I see all of this. I see all of them. They mattered. Each one mattered. And you know it. You have always known it. That is why you could never stop. Not because the gifts weren't enough, but because nothing was ever going to be enough to fill what you lost when you lost yourself. The hollow shuddered. For the first time in its centuries-long existence, something cracked. Caden reached her. He came in from behind, shifted back, bleeding from a cut above his eye, moving on instinct with no strategy left to him, and wrapped both arms around her from behind the way he used to anchor her when her gift ran wild in the early days. The bone-deep muscle memory of 2 people who had been shaped around each other before they were fully formed. His presence hit the bond like a key hitting a lock. The bond blazed. Not the frayed, guilt-ridden thread it had been. Not the desperate pull of something trying to survive damage. Something rebuilt from the ground up, out of harder material, survival and truth, and 8 years of 2 people becoming who they needed to be before they could be this. The seer gift, anchored and amplified and running clean through both of them, poured into the hollow like light into a room that had been dark for a very long time. Jasper pushed his palms forward. He pulled every stolen gift free at once. Not one thread. All of them. A shaking, brilliant, impossible extraction that turned him white-faced and doubled him at the waist, and didn't stop him for a single second. The hollow came apart. Not violently. Not with sound. The way a held breath releases, the way something ends when it has been held together past its time by nothing more than the will to continue. It dissolved from the center outward, the void filling with the silver light of returned things, and then it was simply gone. The grove exhaled. The frost melted. The torches blazed back to amber. The spring began to flow again. Zara became aware, gradually, of Caden's arms still around her, and her own hands gripping them, and the boys, Eli back in human form, Ro blinking himself back into the present, Jasper sitting down heavily in the grass because his legs had made an executive decision. All three of them intact. All three of them hers. She made a sound she hadn't planned. Something that started as a breath and arrived as a sob, brief and violent, and then over, pressed flat by sheer will before it could become something she couldn't stop. Caden's arms tightened. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The boys came to them. Not running, walking, the particular careful approach of children who have just been through something adult-sized and are deciding, in real time, how to carry it. Eli pressed his forehead against his father's arm without a word. Ro tucked himself against Zara's side and breathed. Jasper crawled between them and fell half asleep almost immediately because Jasper's body had always been entirely honest about what it needed. The five of them held each other in the morning light. In the canopy above, where the hollow's cold had been, the birds came back one by one. Epilogue. The claim. 6 months is not a long time in the life of a pack. It is, however, long enough. Long enough to rebuild wards from the ground up, incorporating root magic and seer work, and the particular collaborative stubbornness of two packs that have spent generations not talking to each other and have discovered, under pressure, that their methods are complementary. Long enough for the freed wolves, 11 of them, recovered over the weeks following the hollow's unmaking, found in various states of return across 3 territories, to begin to recognize themselves again. Long enough for 3 silver-eyed boys to start arguing about who gets the largest room in the new lodge and for that argument to feel, finally, like the most ordinary and precious thing in the world. Long enough for certain things between 2 people to be said slowly, carefully, and entirely without the pressure of an immediate threat, which, it turned out, was the only way they could have been said at all. The Ironblood bonding hall had been transformed. The council had not objected. The council, in the months since the Hollow's defeat, had developed a notable reluctance to object to things, having arrived at a collective understanding that their previous objections had cost them considerably more than silence would have. The Ashenvale crest now shared wall space with the Ironblood marks. The claiming arch had been recarved with both bloodlines' symbols intertwined by a craftsman who had worked for 3 weeks and declared it the best thing he'd ever made. The torches burned gold. The moonvine scent hung in the air. Zara stood beneath the arch in deep silver, not white, not the color of something that hadn't happened yet, but the color of moonlight on moving water, something earned and alive. Her hair was loose. No flowers. She decided she was done with flowers. Her sons flanked her. Eli on her left, straight-backed and ferociously dignified in the way of a boy who has decided that if he's going to be in a ceremony, he is going to be the most serious person in it. Ro on her right, calm and present in a way that reached further than the room. Jasper directly behind her, because Jasper had not been given a formal position and had simply selected his own. Each of them wore the Voss crescent openly on their left wrist. Silver and clean and belonging to no one's shame. Caden crossed the hall. No silver coat this time. No ceremony armor. Dark wool, clean and unembellished, the clothes of a man who had decided his authority needed no dressing up. He walked like a man who was done performing things and had arrived at simply being them. He stopped across from her. The High Elder raised her staff. This time, when Zara reached out her hand, he was already reaching for it. The Elder began the binding words. They were the same words they had been 30 years ago and 300 years ago, old words, worn smooth by repetition into something that held its shape entirely from use. But they landed differently here, in this particular configuration of people on this particular night, and everyone in the hall knew it, and no one spoke. When the words finished, Caden pressed his forehead to hers. The oldest gesture. Older than the words, older than the hall, older than the pack that built it. Two wolves acknowledging each other at the level below language, where things are simply true. I claimed the wrong things for too long, he said quietly. Just for her. The hall was silent enough that the candles could be heard. I know what I'm claiming now. She looked at him. The man who had broken her and the man who had helped rebuild her into something neither of them had known she could be. Both of them somehow the same person, and that being somehow enough. Then claim it, she said. The bond not restored, not repaired, but rebuilt entirely, from stronger material than either of them had possessed at the beginning, blazed through them both like a first breath. Like a door opened into a room full of light. The hall erupted. Wolves in their hundreds, the combined voices of two packs becoming one, sound filling the carved and storied walls until they rang with it. Eli watched with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and an expression of ferocious approval that was exactly her face and exactly Caden's all at once. Rose smiled at something only he could see, some version of this moment that was perhaps slightly ahead or behind the present one, some adjacent truth he was observing from whatever gentle distance his gift gave him. Jasper had climbed the ceremonial pillar beside the arch and was trying to improve his view, while Nadia reached up without looking and put her hand flat on the top of his head and pressed him back to earth. Outside, the moon hung full and blazing. Not crimson. Not a warning. Simply full, that particular generous fullness that asks for nothing and illuminates everything, the kind of moonlight that makes the world look like it has been waiting to be seen correctly. Zara felt it on her face when they stepped outside afterward, the whole improbable gathering of them spilling into the night, and she tipped her head back and let herself simply be here. Let the weight of what had been put down 8 years of running, the cold rejection mark long since replaced by the warm, steady press of a real claim, the particular exhaustion of being someone's only line of defense, put it down and not pick it back up. Caden's hand found hers. She didn't pull away. Somewhere behind them, Jasper found another pillar and Eli found another reason to disapprove of this, and Rose smiled again at something the rest of them couldn't see quite yet, a future, probably, that he had decided was worth the wait. And the moon blazed on. And the goddess, having written what she intended in exactly the ink she chose, rested. The end. Thank you for watching.